So welcome everyone to the last session of the day with an amazingly exciting topic, demystifying RNF. So if you are not here for this, I will not be offended, feel free to leave. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Lynn Sager. I'm one of the business analysts in the Office of Human Resources supporting Connect Carolina. I could not do this alone, so I needed to bring my colleague, Chris Lawless. She is with the Commitment Accounting Group, and any sort of financially type questions you ask, I'm just going to go like this, Chris, and have her answer them.
Back to you.
So, all right, so we're going to get through this. So what my agenda, we are going to define RNF. You've probably heard this term, you've seen it, you're not even sure what it is. We're going to describe it eligibility-wise and non-eligibility, talking about how to and where to enter it, when you can't use it, what happens when something executes, give you some useful information, resources, and final questions. But please feel free to ask questions as we go through. Ready to go? All right. So what is RNF? It stands for regular no FICA. So we all pay taxes, and certain people are exempt from having to pay the FICA part of their taxes. It's an earnings code, and we have a bunch of earnings code in our system. For example, reg would indicate regular pay. What's an earnings code? It describes that type of activity. It drives a number of pieces of processing in the system, including taxation, distribution, and some more details that Chris could describe. 95% of all of the transactions we do in Connect Carolina are reg. It's the 5% they give us. Blank is equal to reg. So a lot of times on your ePars, you don't even see an earnings code. Blank equal reg. If you wanted to see the full list of the earnings code, it's pretty long. You can go to InfoPort. It's on the tools under the chart field lookup tab. Have at it. So who is eligible for this RNF? So a postdoc trainee, whoop, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, would you like to answer it? Next year, you're doing this presentation. A postdoc trainee who's on a training grant or a fellowship, which pays as a stipend, which does not have any allowance for FICA. T32s, F32s are the common ones. There are other sponsors who also have RNF, but those are the two you'll probably see the most. I know you're thinking, wait a minute, I'm in HR. What the heck is she talking about? That's all on the grant side. And that's true. And a lot of you I know get your transactions from, hey, we're going to hire this postdoc. They didn't say what kind of postdoc. And even if they use the qualifier at the end, take it with a little grain of salt. It's not until your finance person provides you with the chart field information that you start to get a clue as to what kind of postdoc you might be trying to hire. And then be careful, a lot of the language in the letters use the words trainee and research associate interchangeably, correctly or incorrectly.
But it's all the same.
No, they are different. We will talk about the differences. Some clinical fellows are also here on training grants, and they too would be eligible for RNF. There's a little caveat to processing those, which we'll talk about. So who is not eligible would be your research associates. So they are here typically on a grant of many people, and they are not in the training phase of being a postdoc. Other people who might be here as a trainee, but they are here under certain visa, work visas, where they are here to study or teach, and that always overwrites the RNF. So even if you've been told they should be paid as a stipend, postdoc trainee, that's fine, you put that in, but the system, we're smart enough to say, oh, no. We have to make them either be here on this study, and that's all set by payroll based on their work visa status. Postdoc stipends, which are not paid through ePars or HR payroll. So I know there were, I think it's 4 or 5 students this year from, was it dental school? I think it was the dental school, who they are not, they're paying them as through the accounts payable system, not as a HR payroll transaction. I don't actually know the why they do it that way, but
Pre-doc stipends are never paid.
oh, that's right, it's pre-docs, right? Pre-docs. So they would not be eligible for RNF because they're not even in that postdoc category. So that's eligibility. Questions on any of that? Okay. So how does this all work? So in the ideal world, you're designating this on the funding grid, whether it's a hire action, a job action, or a fund swap. I said ideally. So here's our typical funding grid. And if you notice, this person has 2 rows. The first one has an earnings code of RNF, and the second has nothing. So nothing equals rank. You're awake? Okay, good. Thank you. I had to make sure. I put it in expanded mode. You all know you can do that, of course, with the funding grid. And what I wanted to point out is the account. So that account of 568770 or 568780 is specific to RNF. So those two go hand in hand. So if you're putting RNF, I better see a 568770 or 780. If you're not putting that account code, I better not see RNF. So when we see an ePar come through and those are mismatches, we don't know which is right or wrong, we're going to reach out to you. When can't you enter the RNF code? So clinical fellows. And I don't know anybody in the room who does clinical fellows. Anybody? Well, it's you do. You have one. So on the funding grid, there isn't even a column for earnings code, because when we were putting all the specifications together for Connect Carolina, nobody told us that there were clinical fellows who could get RNF on them. So those will always require a ticket. So just know that up front. If the funding grid's only going to have one line of funding, so they are 100% paid on that training grant, then the ePar, well, it's going to let you start to put it in, which is great. But then when you go to save, it wants a blank row. It's a very informative message. So the reason is that the system needs you to always have 100% of reg and 100% of RNF, however you divide it up. We do some of that processing behind the scenes, but we didn't do it for this circumstance. So this will fail. So what do? You take it off. Then, so you took it off, submit a help desk ticket and request that be put on. I also highly recommend you put comments on your ePars saying that this should be RNF, the system won't let me put it in, I'll submit a help desk ticket, blah, 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 blah. Because otherwise, somewhere up your chain, you may get somebody who recycles it. So without saying that, it looks like you just may have missed making that change. Any questions on that piece of it? I have more examples of when you can or can't do it, but that's probably the most common. Yes?
So they are having somebody
Yes.
So they're not RNF.
No, this is the case when you only have one line of funding.
And so having said they need to have 100% RNF.
You'll see that in a minute.
So is that okay if there's 2 lines?
Yes.
And one's like 5%
Yes.
regular?
We take care of it on the back end.
Okay.
So what happens when that example of an ePar executes? So the HR business analysts, and I'm not the only one who does it, the whole team gets to do this, we have to add some data to the job record as to how to distribute this in dollars. Then we create a help desk ticket. If there isn't already, we send it to commitment accounting, where those business analysts have to update the department budget table, we call it the DBT, in terms of percentages. They have to put in the tax overrides for the FICA. They have to adjust the project end date quite often. They have to do any PAP transactions in case there was tax redistribution that needs to happen. And then we send the ticket to payroll to actually process the FICA adjustment if it was retro. That's a lot of work. So if we can get them right at the beginning, we're much happier. And I think you would be as well. Even though you don't know that this is going on, your employee does. Now, they may not understand their taxation on their paycheck, but if you've got two people in a department who are paid the same, and they start talking about how much take-home pay they have, and one has a whole lot more than the other, and there's no other tax treaty going on in there, one of them is probably being taxed incorrectly. And when we find out about it, we go back and we correct it, except the end of the beginning of the next calendar year. So we cannot cross the calendar year to correct things. So any postdoc hires or job change, pay rate changes you do in December, really pay extra attention to. December is a really compressed month as it is on the payroll schedule if you looked at it. And if we get it wrong, they're never going to be able to be corrected for that tax for, in this case, 2018, because we'll pay it wrong and we've moved on. So we really want to try to get those right. Luckily, we don't do a lot of hiring in the month of December, or pay rate changes, but just keep that in mind. Oh, I already said that. So let's pretend that that one-line example did in fact execute, and it went through all of us. So the HRBAs did their piece, the CABAs did their piece, and now you go in and look at it, or you go to start a new action. The funding grid looks very different. So this goes back to your question, Rachel, of, well, I only put in that RNF for the 47,000. Why am I seeing now this huge $94,000 salary at a percent of 200? Commitment accounting had to put that 100% of reg in. You didn't, which is great. So that's what they added because it has to be there. You can ignore it. And we want you to ignore it when you're viewing. If you add a new grid, because now let's say, I don't know, that's a 7-1. Let's say, we'll pretend this is more recent, but you found out for October 1 that something about this is changing. Maybe they have a new project number, whatever it is. If you add a new grid, you're going to need to remove that row on the new grid. If it's still going to be just one, you don't want to have it look like it's distributing 200%. It's fine for the old grid. You can't touch it on the old grid. It's just going to show you the information and it will write through fine. And when you do that, again, comments on the ePars, because again, that upline approver who looks at it and goes, so did we pay the person $94,000 for the months of July through September? That's clearly too much. So if you put comments, I think it's really helpful. I would love for approvers to come to this kind of a demo too, to understand what they're approving for RNF, because I think it's a huge mystery here. And I know there are many ePars that get recycled inappropriately. Okay, so now let's talk about what is a stipend. So this is living expenses that are paid to a person who is going through a training, during their training experience. It can't be considered a condition of employment. So when you're trying to decipher, is this person who I'm told I'm hiring this postdoc, look at this definition and see where does that person fit. Is it salary that is going to be measurable, or is it to offset their living expenses? They are not salary or wages, so those effort reports wouldn't include them. And if you are interested in more Information about effort reporting, there's a lovely link to it. And these slides will be available after like a week or 10 days after this. Yes?
Talked about this before. They are not receiving salary or wages. Are they actually an employee of the university?
I think that is a fabulous question. And people with pay grades way bigger than mine need to make that distinction. So at NC State, the answer is no. NC State does not treat their postdoc trainees who are stipend-based as employees and pay them through their vendor system or accounts payable. Here, they have been treated as employees, and this discussion came up a number of years ago and died. So anytime you want to lead that charge, feel free to. The ones that I think make it a little murky, and I think this is where that argument sort of falls flat, is that was a $48,000 salary. Well, your department's special. You pay your postdocs $55,000. So your department's supplementing it. Well, is that supplemental part wages then? Are they now an employee? So it's only the purebreds who only get their stipend are not employees, and I think that muddies the water. I don't know how NC State solves for that, or maybe they don't allow departments to do it. I don't know.
I think that's how it is. So do they get that income on a W-2? That with the RNF code? This is not really.
So they do, because they still pay state and state taxes and.
Like part of it is they have that second line for a little bit extra.
Oh yeah. So either way, so they pay FICA on that differential, and then they pay state taxes on all, and federal taxes on all of it. Oh, the bells are ringing. So the NIH, and this was, Chris made me add this, so I'm just reading it because I don't actually know what this means, but NIHK awards, the Research Center Development Awards, should be paid as salary effort instead of stipend. I'm sure some of you in this room actually know what that means. Okay, any questions on that? For sure. So in InfoPort, if you have access, this is where those earnings codes are. In the upper right corner, there's that tools, the chart field lookup, the earnings code. It will defaults to showing only 5 at a time, and there's 272 entries if you ever want to see them. I'll show you that. The sponsor decides the stipend levels, and it's going to be based on that person's level of experience. So when they come in, year 0 or year 1, they've got one rate. Typically, that will either stay in place or increase small amounts over the years. And every now and then, NIH, as a big example, may reshuffle all of their rates, and departments make the decisions of how and when to do it based on all of those pieces that go into it. Those are the ones that it'd be great if you know it in advance, that you're doing the transaction before they're incorrectly taxed, if that would be the case. These are some of the most common service award stipends. So there's this mysterious system called X-Train. I think you have to have like top level security clearance here at UNC to see it. Apparently you can go to this site to find out about using it. I went to it and went, oh, more than I can figure out. But an ERA Commons account, please Chris, jump in at any point here. You can.
ERA Commons is the NIH list. And within ERA Commons, so that's going to have all your information about all your NIH projects. And there is X-Train is part of ERA Commons. So X-Train is specific to training grants. So that's where you've got all your statement of appointments. You can still see the award itself from ERA Commons. You'll see your, that's where you can find your notice of grant award. It's like any other, like R01 or whatever other type of award. But X-Train is going to be specific to the training grants. And if someone is, if a postdoc or a clinical fellow is being appointed on a T32, say, they've got to have a statement of appointment in X-Train. the notice of grant award from NIH will specify the person has to be approved by NIH and have the statement of appointment and X-ray before we can start paying on that project.
And I know there's often a lag between when that happens and when the employee actually starts. So quite often you are starting to hire somebody, paying them against non-NIH grant project funds because it hasn't yet, it's been awarded, but it hasn't made it all the way through the process, including UNC's acceptance and putting it in our system. So thank you for adding that, because that's more detail than I want. So one of the neat things is when we get an ePar that comes by, and I see that they've coded them as a postdoc research associate. That was the job code that was selected. But the account code is one that I would expect to see a postdoc trainee on. I go, ooh, I'm going to ask Chris to use her magic powers and go see, did this person actually, because one of the two things are wrong and I don't know which it is. Or I'll reach out to the department and say, one of these things are wrong. And unfortunately, quite often the HR person doesn't have any visual view into X-ray or ERA Commons.
And it's not always an NIH grant.
Right.
So NIH are the easy.
But you have magical powers for all of them. Because you're
I have
just,
Ramsey's access too, so I can read the contract.
so she's magical. And hopefully somebody in your finance organization has that level of access to be able to do it. You may be getting your information second or third hand, so go back to as far back in the source as you need to. So here's an example of the NIH stipend rates for 2019 fiscal year awards, and you see them the monthly amount as well as the annualized amount. So if we had that first year hire that comes in at $48,432, department wants to pay them $50,000 to make them equitable with everybody that they hire for first years or year zero. Then we know that some of it's going to be reg, that 2,000-ish, and the other is going to be RNF. That's a transaction we like. Those go through the system. So it still worked for us.
I still
But
have to do behind the scenes.
yes, and so do we. No, we do, because it won't split it well. So we do. But it's the ones where you have just one line that you cannot put RNF on the funding grid. You will have to leave it blank, comment it in the comments, and submit a help desk ticket. Did this make any of this clearer? Sorry. Yes.
They only have one line. We take out the default in the new grid. And do we need to submit a health ticket after doing a fund swap?
So yes, if you're changing the how, or it's a different account, or any of the parts are different. So actually I would say yes in general. It's just safer. So when you are doing a fund swap and you start it and you're seeing the grid with that 200, you add your new grid, you're leaving that alone, you remove the line, you change whatever piece you're going to change in there. Is there anyone you wouldn't care about? Any change that they would do that you wouldn't care about?
Well, so the fund swaps, we will sometimes see a fund swap where maybe the stipend target and amount are not changing, but maybe they're changing the stipend. That is not going to impact HR, but what it does do when it executes, it gets rid of the FICA override that we've set up, so then it could cause the FICA to hit those rates. I have queries that I'll run periodically, especially before we have payroll, to make sure that we didn't have any of those that got reset and we put the FICA overrides this year. Also, you probably noticed on your NIH awards when you put in your ePar, it populates with whatever the project's end date is. But trainees on those T32s, training grants, their appointment may go on and go beyond that project's end date. I'm the one that looks up when that employee's end for that training rank should be, and I'll populate it behind the scenes. So you can't alter, you can't make it a future date on the ePars, but I can do it once your ePars is executed. So even your fund swaps, I'll check it for both the FICA reason and for that end date.
But wouldn't you agree that a help desk ticket would earlier in the month versus waiting to the crunch at the end of the month? I mean, July killed us. It always does. But I would say yes, as soon as you're submitting it, I would definitely put in a help desk ticket. And that way we know that it's already in the pipeline. We'll watch for it to get executed if it can, or get it stuck, and then we can route that ticket. So I would definitely do that. Yeah, so anytime somebody is changing to or from, absolutely. It's unusual for them to go from a research associate back to a trainee unless they change discipline or, going a different track. But yes, anytime that's happening, assume that nothing automatically is going to happen positively.
Yeah, even if the remedy ticket we just go,
Yep, everything looks good.
everything's fine, and because the remedy, it's much better for us to have those few extra minutes to check, rather than the person's gotten their paycheck and they got taxed and now they're angry and beating on their door, want to know why they got taxed and they never got taxed before.
And the other piece that we aren't really talking about here, but a lot of departments think they can fix that with a PAT transaction, and you can't. So if somebody was taxed and they shouldn't have been, I'll just do a PAT transaction, make those taxes go poof. No, it doesn't work that way. We've got to go back in time payroll-wise to make that person's taxation correct. Then, if you need to move the money for different accounts or whatever, then you could do that as a PAT transaction. Did I say that right?
PAT can only redistribute existing expenses. They can't increase or decrease the overall expenses. So if we've overtaxed somebody, payroll has to do a correction. Then we can PAT the original and the adjustment as needed. But PAT itself can't create transactions that were never on the original ledger or remove some of the expenses that occurred. Now, I will say, when we get to the end of a calendar year, if there were taxes on it, it's now too late. We've already reported now we're in January and we can't fix the previous tax year. Those will generally move those taxes off of the stipend funding source and move to the departmental funding. So we can't leave them on the drain. So the department has to do it. So put in a remedy and we can stop it in the first place,
Right.
and then nobody has to do anything. Nobody's spending on your door.
The other thing to consider is if you are doing a retroactive pay change. So we're now about to do October's pay, and you find out this employee should have had their distribution split differently for July. It was done wrong from the get-go. When you submit that, and it lets you because it's the split, so it's going to write, but now you've changed the amounts, not the overall amount, but the plus or minus. So it went from 95% of 5 to maybe 90 and 10. That adjustment of those taxes does not happen automatically. So that has to be a remedy ticket for us to intervene. We run a lot of audit reports and we pass tickets back and forth between the two of us all the time. But wherever possible, we would love the end users to start that process because you know about it before while it's going versus, so we have a chance to look at it. If I look at it while it's in process and I see trainee, no trainee account. Ooh, this doesn't look right to me. I'm going to stop and reach out to that originator earlier, or vice versa. Questions? Does any of this make sense? It's crazy. So just know that this was not well designed at Go Live. I think it was definitely how are we going to do this now that we've gone live? And this is what we've been working with. I hope in our next iterations of forms we can do something better and have the system. I mean, that 100% right piece is never going away. That is an absolute stop point for the system. But I think we have opportunities to make this a little more intuitive and make it easier. I will say I'm seeing a huge trend, I don't love it, where people are doing the hire to, and some of it is because they don't have the actual project information yet. So they're doing a hire as a postdoc trainee action, and the next day, a fund swap. Now that transaction didn't take a week to go through. So I think it was the HR person saying, I need to get this through, I want to get this person hired, they want to start working, and didn't reach out and get the right funding information from their finance person. That's 2 times that we're going to look at things. Because we'll look at it when the hire action comes through, and we're going to look at it again when the fund swap comes through. So wherever possible, if you can consolidate that and get it right from the hire, we love it. If for their reappointment, I have seen a couple of cases where the reappointment, somebody has checked the, I don't want to see the compensation, which is not likely because they should be getting an increase. Not always, but often. I would tell you with a postdoc, never hide that. Always show comp. Even if you're not going to change it, always show comp. That way it's forcing you to think about it.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some of those sort of reappointments are done based on what's their annual UNC reappointment. It's got nothing to do with their NIH appointment. So I don't need to change the compensation. Some of those people have been reset to being 100% reg, while their payrolls will be suspended for the supplemental salaries. Or they're going 100% RNF, and it's all going to the stipend. And then all the tax cleanup has happened on the PATs, and the closer we get to the calendar year end, less chances we can fix the taxes before they report. So RNFs are just wacky.
And it's a
in general.
small population. For some departments, it can only be, it might be 5 people. And so that you're not doing high volume. School of Medicine has the highest volume. A lot of theirs are also clinical fellows, so we see a fair amount of those come through for them. But for some of the other schools, I know they are infrequent, and when they come up, you'll be like, what? So this will be posted as a webinar-ish thing on the CC Info site. Feel free to refer back to it. And when in doubt, if you're not sure, put in a help desk ticket, because we would rather talk to you before we get it wrong and have to fix and clean up and all of that than try to do the fix and clean up after that. Any other questions? Was this helpful?
Yes.
So how many of you went to the postdoc, I process for postdoc people, I handle postdoc people, so I have to go to that training that, I think it's VC Research you guys put on, right? How many of you in this room went to that? Would this be useful to incorporate, or is it a different population of people who come to that training?
I would like to incorporate some of your lines into that training. And it's not a mandatory training.
Right. Any chance of making people who process postdoc ePars making it mandatory? Because I talk to a lot of them. That one-on-one is just not kind of what it is.
This person engraved invitation.
Yeah.
Send them in there to pick them up.
So, and I know the focus is really more on the postdoc themselves and how do they, how do you handle all those different pieces. But if they're also an HR rep that would be doing transactions, I think that and maybe make this the very end. And so those who aren't doing HR transactions can leave. Of course, it may be early in their day 3 of their employment and they don't even know what the word ePars even means. So I'm not sure where this best fits, but I feel like this is a missing piece of our training for anybody who might process these transactions and trying to figure out where the right place to insert it is. So with that, if there's no more questions, you all got a few minutes extra back. So thank you for coming. What do I do?